Sarah never imagined that her life would take such an unexpected turn. One day she was just another shy, introverted high school girl trying to survive the torment of daily bullying. The next, she found herself in the unfamiliar role of a stepmother at only 17 years old. It was a transformation that no one, not even Sarah herself, could have foreseen. For years, Sarah had struggled with the relentless cruelty of her classmates. Every day at school felt like a battlefield where she had to dodge hurtful whispers, cruel pranks, and the suffocating loneliness that came from being labeled as an outcast. She was mocked for her quiet nature, for the way she dressed, and even for the things she loved. No matter how hard she tried to blend in, she always seemed to stand out as an easy target. But despite the pain, Sarah had always held on to a small glimmer of hope that one day life would change, that one day she would finally escape the torment and find a place where she truly belonged. What she never expected was that her escape would come in such an unusual form, stepping into the role of a stepmother to two children who were just as lost and wounded as she once was. How does a bullied girl, struggling with her own self-worth, suddenly find herself responsible for the emotional well-being of two children? How does she navigate the complexities of a blended family when she herself has never felt fully accepted? Sarah's story is not just about the struggles of bullying. It's about resilience, healing, and the extraordinary ways life pushes us into the roles we are destined to play. Bullying is a silent epidemic that continues to plague schools across the world. Studies show that 1 out of every 5 students experiences some form of bullying, and in many cases the effects can last a lifetime. Girls, especially those who are introverted or perceived as different, are often the primary targets of emotional and psychological bullying. Unlike physical aggression, which leaves visible scars, emotional bullying is a wound that remains hidden, festering inside the victim's mind, eroding their self-confidence and sense of self-worth. Victims of bullying are far more likely to struggle with anxiety, depression, and even suicidal thoughts. In extreme cases, the torment becomes too much to bear, leading to tragic consequences. School should be a place of learning and growth, but for students like Sarah, it became a daily nightmare, one that followed her everywhere she went. The psychological effects of bullying extend beyond childhood. Many victims grow up carrying the same insecurities that were instilled in them at a young age. They struggle to trust others, to form meaningful relationships, and to see their own worth. For Sarah, these struggles shaped every aspect of her life, making it even more difficult when she was suddenly placed in the role of a stepmother. But her story is not just about pain. It is about transformation. It is about finding strength in the most unexpected places and learning that even the most broken souls can find a way to heal. Sarah's journey is one that resonates with so many young people who have been bullied, neglected, or made to feel like they don't belong. It's a reminder that no matter how dark things may seem, change is always possible. Her transformation did not happen overnight. At first, stepping into the role of a stepmother was overwhelming. She was still battling her own self-doubt, still hearing the echoes of the cruel words that had been thrown at her throughout her childhood. And now she had 2 stepchildren, Emily and Jack, who were just as wounded as she had once been. At only 17, Sarah had no idea how to be a parent. She barely knew how to take care of herself, let alone 2 children who had their own struggles and resentment toward the idea of having a stepmother. The household was filled with tension, and Sarah often felt like she was drowning, but something inside her refused to give up. Through small, persistent acts of kindness, Sarah slowly began to earn the trust of her stepchildren. She helped Emily with her homework, encouraged Jack when he felt withdrawn, and most importantly, she listened. She knew what it felt like to be unheard, to be ignored, and she refused to let them feel the same pain she had endured for so many years. As she helped them, something incredible happened. She began to heal too. The same girl who had once been bullied for being too quiet now found her voice in a role she never expected. The same girl who had once felt like she didn't belong was now creating a family of her own. Sarah's story is not just about one girl's journey. It is a reflection of the struggles that so many people face. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and a powerful reminder that our past does not define our future. There are millions of young people around the world who, like Sarah, have felt the sting of isolation and rejection. Many of them feel as though they will never escape their pain, but Sarah's journey proves that change is possible. Life may not always unfold the way we expect, but sometimes the most unexpected paths lead us to where we are meant to be. This story is not just about bullying or being a stepmother or overcoming adversity. It is about the strength that comes from surviving hardship, the lessons we learn through pain, and the incredible power of resilience. As we dive deeper into Sarah's journey, we will explore how she navigates the challenges of her new life, the struggles she faces in gaining her stepchildren's trust, and the lessons she learns along the way. Her story is one of transformation, of a bullied girl who found her strength in the most unexpected way. No one, not even Sarah herself, could have predicted how her life would change. But one thing is certain, she is no longer just the bullied girl. She is something more. She is a survivor, she is a stepmother, and she is proof that even the most broken beginnings can lead to something beautiful. Sarah had always been different. She wasn't loud or outgoing like the other girls in her school. She preferred books over gossip, silence over chaos, and solitude over forced social interactions. While most of her classmates eagerly formed cliques and navigated the ever-changing dynamics of teenage friendships, Sarah remained on the sidelines, watching but never truly belonging. From the moment she stepped into middle school, she knew she didn't fit in. She wasn't conventionally pretty, she didn't wear designer clothes, and she wasn't part of the popular crowd. She was just Sarah, a girl with a quiet voice, an anxious heart, and a desperate wish to be invisible. Unfortunately, the more she tried to disappear, the more she became a target. The bullying started small. At first, it was just whispers in the hallway, giggles behind her back. Her classmates would exchange amused glances whenever she walked into the room, and she could feel their judgment even when no words were spoken. Then the words came. Freak. Loser. Why do you even come to school? You'll never be good enough. The taunts followed her everywhere, between classes, in the cafeteria, even on social media. It didn't take long for Sarah's name to become synonymous with easy target. The more they saw her flinch, the harder they pushed. Sometimes the bullying was subtle. A book accidentally knocked off her desk, a seat taken just as she was about to sit down, a group of girls bursting into laughter whenever she passed by, even when she knew she had done nothing wrong. Other times it was cruel and direct. Notes stuffed in her locker calling her ugly and worthless. Anonymous messages on social media telling her she should just disappear. A rumor that spread like wildfire that she had a crush on one of the popular boys, causing endless humiliation. Sarah tried to pretend it didn't affect her. She forced herself to keep walking, to keep her head down, to keep breathing. But every word, every insult, every act of cruelty chipped away at her self-worth until there was almost nothing left. Perhaps the worst part wasn't the insults, it was the loneliness. Sarah had no real friends, at least not the kind who stood up for her. The few classmates who were nice to her did so in private, afraid of becoming the next targets. No one wanted to risk their own social standing by defending the school's favorite victim. Lunchtime was the hardest. She hated walking into the cafeteria, knowing that no table would welcome her. She often chose the farthest corner, eating as quickly as possible so she could escape to the library. But even there, she wasn't safe. The whispers followed her, the stares, the feeling of being utterly and completely alone in a room full of people. Teachers noticed but rarely intervened. Sometimes they gave her sympathetic looks, but they never truly put a stop to it. The school had an anti-bullying policy, but policies meant nothing when the torment happened in ways that couldn't be punished. Sarah's grades began to slip. It wasn't that she wasn't intelligent. She had always been a good student, but it became harder and harder to focus when her mind was constantly filled with anxiety. She dreaded going to school, and every night she lay awake, replaying the events of the day, anticipating the cruelty that awaited her the next morning. At home, things weren't much better. Sarah's parents were good people. They worked hard, provided for her, and wanted the best for her. But they were also busy, too busy to notice the cracks in their daughter's fragile world. Her mother was a nurse who worked long shifts at the hospital. By the time she came home, she was exhausted. Her father ran a small business, often coming home late and preoccupied with work. They asked Sarah about school, but she always gave the same answer: "It's fine." They never questioned it. Sarah longed to tell them the truth, to let them see the pain she carried every day, but she couldn't find the words. How do you explain to your own parents that you feel worthless, that no one likes you, that you don't even know who you are anymore because the person in the mirror looks more like a ghost than a girl? So she stayed silent. Whenever her parents talked about school, they focused on her grades. "You need to study harder. You used to be a straight A student. Why aren't you putting in more effort?" Sarah wanted to scream that she was trying, that every single day she was fighting a battle just to survive, but instead, she just nodded. It was easier that way. As the bullying intensified, Sarah began to fantasize about escaping. She imagined running away, starting over in a place where no one knew her name, where she could finally breathe without fear. She withdrew further into herself. Books became her only refuge. She devoured stories of strong heroines who overcame impossible odds, clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, she could do the same. But no matter how many stories she read, reality was still waiting for her outside the pages. She began to wonder if things would ever change, if she would ever wake up and not dread the day ahead, if she would ever feel like she mattered. And then, just when she thought nothing could surprise her anymore, life threw her the most unexpected twist of all. Her mother was getting remarried. At first, Sarah didn't know what to think. Her parents had been divorced for years, but she had never imagined her mother moving on so quickly. Then she learned the shocking part. Her mother's new husband had 2 children. Suddenly, Sarah wasn't just a bullied girl trying to survive high school. She was about to become a stepmother at the age of 17. The thought terrified her. She could barely take care of herself. How was she supposed to take care of 2 kids? And what if they hated her just like everyone else seemed to? For years, Sarah had felt like an outsider in her own world. Now she was about to enter a new world where she was, once again, the odd one out. Would this be her chance to finally find a place where she belonged? Or was she just walking into another battle, one she wasn't prepared to fight? Sarah didn't know the answer. But what she did know was that life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure if she was ready. For most of her life, Sarah had felt powerless. The bullying, the whispers, the loneliness. It all seemed like an endless cycle that she had no control over. But somewhere deep inside her, a quiet defiance had begun to take root. She refused to let them take everything from her. Though her confidence was shattered, and though the weight of their words still pressed against her like an invisible force, she found small ways to fight back. She couldn't stand up to her bullies directly, but she could refuse to let them steal the one thing that still mattered: her mind. She poured herself into her studies, burying her pain beneath layers of textbooks and notes. If she couldn't be liked, she could at least be intelligent. If she couldn't win their approval, she could win academic achievements. Schoolwork became her shield. Whenever the insults became too much, she focused harder. When she felt the sting of rejection, she drowned herself in equations and literature. If she was solving a math problem or analyzing a novel, then for a brief moment she wasn't Sarah the bullied girl. She was just Sarah, the student, the thinker, the girl with a mind too strong to be broken. But even studying wasn't always enough. Some days, the pain leaked through the cracks, refusing to be ignored. That's when she turned to something else: her journal. Sarah's journal became her sanctuary. She wrote furiously, spilling her emotions onto the pages like ink from a broken pen. At first, her words were filled with sadness, pain, questions that had no answers. Why do they hate me? Am I really as worthless as they say? Will things ever get better? But as the pages filled, something changed. Her journal was no longer just a place to vent. It became a place to think, to reflect, to fight back in her own way. She started writing down things she liked about herself, even if the list was small. I am kind. I am a good student. I care about others even when they don't care about me. I am stronger than I think. The list wasn't easy to write at first. Some days she struggled to come up with even one thing, but she forced herself to try, because deep down, she needed to believe that she wasn't as broken as they made her feel. And then one day, something unexpected happened. Someone noticed her, and for the first time in a long time, someone truly saw her. Mrs. Carter had been Sarah's English teacher for 2 years, but they had rarely spoken beyond class discussions. She was kind, but Sarah never thought of her as someone who could change her life. Until one afternoon. It was after school, and Sarah had been sitting in the library writing in her journal as she often did. She didn't notice Mrs. Carter approaching until she spoke. "I see you writing a lot, Sarah," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Have you ever thought about entering a writing contest?" Sarah blinked in surprise. "A contest?" Mrs. Carter nodded, sliding a flyer across the table. It was for a statewide essay competition. "You have a way with words," she continued. "I can see it in your essays. You write from the heart. I think you should give this a try." Sarah hesitated. No one had ever encouraged her like this before. No one had ever looked at her and seen potential. She wanted to say no, to brush it off, to tell Mrs. Carter that she wasn't good enough, but then she thought about the words in her journal. "I am stronger than I think. Maybe, just maybe, she could try." That night, Sarah wrote her essay. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't polished, but it was raw, honest. It was about her experiences with bullying, about the pain of being invisible, and about the small, quiet strength she was beginning to find within herself. When she handed it to Mrs. Carter the next day, her hands trembled. A week later, she got the results. She hadn't won first place. She had won second. For a brief moment, she couldn't breathe. Not because she was sad, but because she couldn't believe it. Second place, out of hundreds of students. Her words had mattered. The news spread through the school. Some of her classmates sneered, saying the contest wasn't a big deal, but others looked at her differently. One girl, a quiet classmate named Hannah, even approached her. "I read your essay," she said hesitantly. It was really powerful." Sarah didn't know how to respond. She had spent so long believing that no one cared, but for the first time she realized that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as invisible as she thought. Sarah still had bad days. The bullying didn't disappear overnight, but something inside her had changed. She began to walk a little taller, speak a little louder. She still preferred books over people, but she no longer felt ashamed of it. She started participating more in class. When someone tried to mock her, she didn't shrink away. She looked them in the eye. Because she wasn't nothing. She was Sarah, a girl who had been knocked down but refused to stay there, a girl who was slowly, painfully, but surely finding her own strength. And as she sat in her room that night, staring at her second-place certificate, she realized something else. This wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. Sarah had always believed that life moved in slow, predictable motions, especially her life. The bullying at school was a constant shadow. Her home was her only refuge, and even though her parents were distant, they were the only stable figures she had. But all of that changed with one announcement. "I'm getting married." Her mother's voice carried an unusual excitement, but to Sarah the words felt foreign, unnatural, almost like they belonged to someone else's story, not hers. She sat frozen at the kitchen table, her fingers tightening around her glass of water. She had barely processed the words before her mother continued. "His name is David, and he has 2 children." That's when the real shock hit. Not only was her mother marrying someone new, but Sarah was going to have step-siblings. It didn't feel real. She stared at her mother, searching for some hint of hesitation, some understanding of how overwhelming this was, but all she saw was happiness, a kind of happiness Sarah hadn't seen in years. "Sarah, I know this is sudden," her mother said, reaching for her hand, "but David is a wonderful man, and I think this will be good for both of us." Sarah didn't respond. She couldn't. This was supposed to be her safe space. Home was the only place where she could escape from the cruelty of the outside world, and now that was changing too. A week later, Sarah met David. He was kind enough, polite, gentle in his words, and quick to include her in conversations. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was an outsider in her own life. Then came the real challenge, meeting his kids. Emily was 10, bright-eyed, talkative, and full of questions. Jack was 12, quiet, reserved, and clearly skeptical of Sarah's presence. Their first interaction was painfully awkward. "So, do you like movies?" Emily asked, swinging her legs under the dinner table. Sarah looked up, startled. It had been a long time since someone her age, or close to it, had spoken to her without malice. "Yeah," she said cautiously. Emily's face lit up. "Cool. What's your favorite?" Sarah hesitated. I don't know. I guess I like fantasy movies." Jack, who had been silently pushing his food around his plate, scoffed. "Fantasy? You mean those weird magic movies?" Sarah tensed. The tone was all too familiar, the same mocking tone she had heard at school so many times before. "Jack," David warned lightly, "be nice." Jack didn't say anything, but Sarah could feel his disapproval like a heavy weight in the air. She knew that look, that feeling of being unwanted. She had felt it all her life, and now, in her own home, she was feeling it again. The wedding happened quickly, too quickly for Sarah to process. One moment, she was standing in the crowd, watching her mother exchange vows with a man she barely knew. The next, she was packing up her childhood bedroom, preparing to move into a house that didn't feel like hers. The new house was bigger, brighter, but it didn't feel like home. Her old room had been small but comforting. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and her journal sat safely on her desk, a reminder that she still had a space of her own. Here, everything was unfamiliar. The furniture was different. The smell was different. Even the way the sunlight hit the windows made her feel like she was living in someone else's world. Emily and Jack had their own rooms, decorated with posters and toys, evidence that they had grown up in this space. Sarah's new room, on the other hand, was impersonal, freshly painted but empty, like a guest room that had never truly belonged to anyone. She unpacked slowly, each item she placed on the shelf, feeling like a weak attempt to claim something that wasn't really hers. Living with Emily and Jack was more complicated than Sarah had anticipated. Emily was warm and curious, always trying to talk to Sarah, but her enthusiasm was exhausting. She asked too many questions, poked her head into Sarah's room without knocking, and treated Sarah like a sister before Sarah even knew how to be one. Jack, on the other hand, was the opposite. He barely spoke to her, except when he had to, and when he did, it was always short, distant, almost resentful. "She's not our real sister," Sarah overheard him whisper to Emily one night. "She's just here." The words stung more than she wanted to admit. She wasn't their sister. She was just here. Sarah tried to stay out of the way as much as possible. She kept to herself, spending most of her time in her room or outside, escaping into books and journaling. But no matter how hard she tried to disappear, she couldn't ignore the feeling of being misplaced. It wasn't just Jack. Even David, as kind as he was, felt like a stranger she was supposed to call family. Her mother, caught up in the happiness of her new marriage, didn't seem to notice Sarah's struggles. She encouraged her to spend more time with her new family, to embrace the change, but Sarah couldn't. How was she supposed to embrace something that made her feel even more alone? One night, after a particularly tense dinner where Jack had openly ignored her, Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She retreated to her room, closed the door, and broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she gripped her journal, her only real source of comfort. She had thought she was escaping the cruelty of her school life, but instead she had just been thrown into a different kind of isolation. For the first time in a long time, she felt completely lost. She wanted to scream, to run away, to make someone, anyone, understand how much this was tearing her apart. But instead she wrote. She wrote about her confusion, her sadness, her fear that she would never truly belong anywhere. And as she stared at the words on the page, she realized something painful. No matter how hard she tried to fit in, she would always be the outsider. At school, at home, in this new family, she was nowhere and no one. Or at least, that's how it felt. But what Sarah didn't know was that things were about to change in ways she never expected. And that this new chapter in her life, as painful as it was going to shape her into someone she never thought she could be. Sarah never imagined that, at just 17, she would be a stepmother. The very word felt foreign to her. She was still struggling to navigate her own life, still trying to understand who she was, yet suddenly she was expected to fill the shoes of a parental figure for 2 children who barely acknowledged her presence. Every morning she woke up in a house that didn't feel like home, surrounded by people who didn't truly see her as family. She had hoped deep down that things would slowly fall into place, that maybe, just maybe, Emily and Jack would start to warm up to her. But that didn't happen. Instead, their cold reception made it clear. They didn't want her there. Emily and Jack had lost the life they knew when their parents divorced. Now a strange girl had entered their home, someone they never asked for, someone who was not their mother, and they made sure she knew it. At first, Emily tried to act polite, but it was clear she didn't trust Sarah yet. Her smiles were forced, her conversations short, and whenever Sarah tried to help her with anything, Emily would say, "I can do it myself." Jack was far worse. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He barely looked at Sarah, and when he did, his face was filled with disinterest or irritation. He answered questions with one-word responses and never engaged in conversations. At dinner, he would sit silently, avoiding eye contact. The only time he spoke was when he was talking to his father or Emily. It was as if Sarah simply did not exist. One evening, after Sarah had cooked dinner in an effort to bond with them, Jack took one bite and then pushed his plate away. "I don't like this," he muttered, getting up from the table. David sighed. "Jack, come on. She worked hard on this." Jack shrugged. "I'm not hungry." And with that, he left the table. Sarah sat frozen, her hands gripping her fork tightly. She felt humiliated, unwanted, completely invisible. It was the same feeling she had at school, the same cruel rejection, only this time it was happening in what was supposed to be her home. Sarah tried everything to fit in. She offered to help Emily with her school projects, but Emily politely declined. She asked Jack about his interests, but he only responded with a bored shrug. She did chores around the house, hoping they would appreciate her efforts. But instead, she overheard Jack whispering to Emily, "She's trying too hard. It's annoying." That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, fighting back tears. She had felt like an outsider at school. Now she felt like an outsider in her own home. Her mother was too caught up in her new marriage to notice. Whenever Sarah tried to talk about her struggles, her mother would simply say, "Give it time. They'll warm up to you." But how much time? How long would she have to prove that she belonged? The rejection from Emily and Jack triggered every painful memory from her past. The way her classmates whispered about her in the hallways, the way they laughed when she walked into a room, the way she had always been excluded, uninvited, unwanted. She had spent so many years hoping that one day things would be different, that one day she would find a place where she belonged. But here she was again, trapped in a cycle of rejection. Some nights she stared at her reflection in the mirror and wondered if there was something wrong with her. Why was she always the one who didn't fit in? Why was she always the one being pushed aside? Her confidence, already fragile from years of bullying, started to crumble even more. She found herself questioning everything she did. Was she being too pushy, too distant, too awkward? Her journals, once filled with her dreams and thoughts, became a place of pain. Page after page, she wrote about her struggles, her feelings of worthlessness, and her desperate hope that one day anything would change. She began avoiding family dinners, eating in her room instead. She spoke less, fearing that anything she said would be dismissed. She walked around the house carefully, as if she didn't belong there at all. And maybe, she thought bitterly, she really didn't. One evening, she overheard a conversation that shattered her completely. She was passing by the living room when she heard Jack talking to his father. "She's not our mom," he said bluntly. "She shouldn't act like she is." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "I know this is hard for you," David responded, his tone patient. "But Sarah is part of this family now. You need to give her a chance." Jack scoffed. "She's just some girl Mom married. She doesn't belong here." Sarah didn't wait to hear the rest. She rushed to her room, slammed the door shut, and collapsed onto the bed, her whole body shaking. She had tried so hard. She had done everything she could, but it wasn't enough. She would never be enough. Tears blurred her vision as she clutched her pillow tightly. She wanted to disappear, to run away from this house, from this life, from everything, because no matter what she did, no one wanted her. Days passed, and Sarah withdrew even more. She barely spoke to Emily and Jack. She stopped trying to connect with them. She convinced herself that it was better this way. If they didn't want her, then she wouldn't try anymore. But deep down, she knew she was hurting, and for the first time, she wasn't sure how to fix it. Would she always be the girl who didn't belong? Would she ever find a place where she was truly wanted? She didn't know the answer. But what she didn't know was that this moment, this pain, was leading her toward a transformation she never expected. A transformation that would change her life forever. Sarah had almost given up. The walls that Emily and Jack had built around themselves felt impenetrable. No matter what she did, no matter how much she tried, they continued to push her away. She had spent weeks feeling invisible, unwanted, just like she had in school when she was bullied. But there was something different this time. This time, she wasn't going to let rejection define her. She didn't want to be a replacement mother. She didn't expect them to love her overnight, but she refused to be just another stranger in the house. And so Sarah made a choice. She was going to break through their walls, one small step at a time. Sarah started watching and listening more carefully. She noticed that Emily, the 10-year-old, often sat alone at the dining table, staring at her school books with frustration. Sometimes she chewed on her pencil, her brows furrowed, whispering math equations under her breath. Other times she sighed heavily and closed the book altogether. Sarah recognized that frustration. It was the same feeling she had when she struggled with certain subjects at school. Then there was Jack. Unlike Emily, Jack's struggles weren't academic. His struggles were emotional. He barely spoke to anyone, even his father. He locked himself in his room for hours, playing video games or listening to music. His face was always guarded, his voice clipped and distant. Sarah saw it for what it was, a defense mechanism. She knew that silence often carried hidden pain, and she needed to help. Sarah didn't push too hard. Instead, she started with small gestures. When Emily was doing homework, Sarah would quietly sit across from her and work on her own assignments. She wouldn't force a conversation, just be there. Sometimes she'd casually say, "I used to struggle with math too. If you ever need help, let me know." Emily never responded, but she didn't leave the table either. With Jack, Sarah took a different approach. She didn't try to make him talk, but she acknowledged him. "Hey, Jack, I made some extra snacks if you want some. I saw this cool documentary about video games. Thought you might like it. No pressure, but if you ever want to talk about something, I'm here." Jack barely reacted at first. He would either shrug or give her a quick glance before walking away. It hurt, but Sarah reminded herself of something her kind teacher once told her. Sometimes the seeds you plant take time to grow. She had to be patient. And one evening, she saw the first small breakthrough. It started with Emily. Sarah had just finished washing the dishes when she heard a soft voice behind her. "Sarah." She turned around, surprised. Emily never called her by her name. "Yes," she answered gently. Emily hesitated, biting her lip. Then she finally mumbled, "Can you help me with my math homework?" Sarah's heart swelled with relief. "Of course," she said, keeping her voice casual. She didn't want to scare Emily away by acting too excited. As they sat down together, Sarah patiently explained the equations, breaking them down in a way that made sense. Half an hour later, Emily's face lit up. "Oh, I get it now," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with excitement. Sarah smiled. "See? You're smarter than you think." For the first time, Emily gave her a real, genuine smile. And in that moment, Sarah realized a door had finally opened. A few days later, Sarah experienced another small but significant breakthrough. One evening, as she was about to head to bed, she heard a knock on her door. It was Jack. She blinked in surprise. "Hey, everything okay?" Jack hesitated, then awkwardly scratched the back of his head. I just wanted to say thanks." Sarah frowned slightly. "Thanks? For what?" Jack cleared his throat and looked away. "For the snacks. And for not, trying too hard." Sarah's heart softened. He was trying. In his own quiet, awkward way, he was trying. She didn't want to ruin the moment, so she just nodded. "You're welcome, Jack." He gave a small nod in return and walked away. It wasn't much, but to Sarah, it meant everything. Sarah knew things wouldn't change overnight. There would still be bad days, days where Jack retreated into his silence, days where Emily shut down again. But now, there were also good days, small conversations at the dinner table, the occasional joke shared between them, moments of trust, however brief, that meant things were slowly changing. Sarah was no longer just an outsider in the house. She was becoming part of their lives, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Sarah never thought she would find healing in such an unexpected way. For years, she had been trapped in the painful echoes of her past, defined by bullying, rejection, and loneliness. Every cruel word, every whispered insult, every moment of exclusion had built walls around her heart. But now, as she spent time with her stepchildren, those walls were slowly crumbling. At first, she hadn't noticed it happening. She had been so focused on earning Emily and Jack's trust that she didn't realize something profound was happening within herself. Helping them was helping her heal. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt lighter. Self-doubt had always been Sarah's shadow. It whispered in her ear, reminding her of all of the times she wasn't enough. "You're not smart enough. You're not strong enough. You'll always be the girl that nobody wanted." But as the days passed, as she helped Emily through her school struggles and slowly broke through Jack's emotional walls, she began to see a different truth. She was patient. She was capable. She was making a difference. One evening, as she sat at the kitchen table helping Emily with her homework, she had a sudden realization. She was doing what no one had ever done for her. She was being there. She was listening, guiding, supporting, without judgment, without expectations. And in doing so, she was proving that the cruel words from her past did not define her. For the first time, she started to believe in herself. Sarah knew she wasn't perfect. There were still days when doubt crept in, days when Jack would snap at her for no reason, or when Emily would retreat into silence, reminding Sarah of her own struggles with loneliness. But instead of breaking down, she found herself standing tall. She had survived worse. The bullying in school had tried to crush her spirit, but she was still here. And now, instead of letting her past consume her, she was using it as fuel to be better, to do better. She realized that every hardship she had faced had prepared her for this moment. The girl who had once been bullied was now a source of strength for others. She wasn't weak. She was resilient. One of the biggest lessons Sarah learned was empathy. She had spent so many years in pain that she had forgotten something important. Everyone carries their own burdens. Emily wasn't just a stubborn child struggling with math. She was a little girl who had been torn away from the life she knew, forced to adjust to a new family, a new reality. Jack wasn't just a moody, distant boy. He was a preteen whose world had been shattered by his parents' divorce. His anger wasn't directed at Sarah. It was a shield to protect himself from more pain. The moment Sarah understood this, something shifted. She stopped taking their resistance personally. Instead, she listened more. She watched more carefully. She spoke less, but meant more. And slowly she started to understand them, not just as stepchildren, but as people. Sarah had never thought of herself as a leader. She had always been the girl in the background, the one too afraid to raise her hand in class, too scared to speak up. But now, without even realizing it, she had stepped into a leadership role, not by force, not by authority, but by example. She led with kindness. She led with patience. She led with love. And that leadership was changing everything. One night, as Sarah was heading to her room, she heard Jack's voice call out, "Sarah!" She turned around. "Yeah?" Jack hesitated for a moment, then said, "You're not that bad, you know." Sarah blinked, caught off guard. It wasn't much, but coming from Jack, it meant the world. She smiled. "Thanks, Jack." And in that moment, she realized she wasn't just a bullied girl anymore. She was a role model. She was a stepmother. She was enough. And for the first time, she truly believed it. Sarah never thought she would find herself in this position. A stepmother at 17, it still sounded surreal. For so long, she had been the girl who faded into the background, the girl who felt invisible in the hallways of her school, the girl who was treated like she didn't belong. But now, in this new life, in this new home, things were changing, slowly, softly, and it all started with a name. In the beginning, Emily and Jack barely spoke to her. When they did, it was stiff, forced, or cold. "Where's Dad?" "When is dinner?" "I don't need your help." Her presence had been tolerated but never welcomed. But over time, things started to shift. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was in the little things. The way Emily would linger just a bit longer at the kitchen table after finishing her homework. The way Jack would roll his eyes a little less when she asked how his day was. The way they no longer ignored her when she walked into a room. Then, one evening, it happened. Sarah was in the kitchen making tea when Emily rushed in, her face flushed with excitement. "Sarah, look!" The words stopped Sarah in her tracks. Sarah. Not in annoyance, not in frustration, not in coldness, but with warmth. Emily held out a drawing, 2 stick figures holding hands, one labeled me and the other labeled Sarah. Sarah stared at it for a long moment, her throat tightening. She blinked rapidly, pushing down the sudden wave of emotion. "You made this?" she asked, her voice soft. Emily nodded. "Yeah, I just thought, I don't know, I wanted to show you." Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat and smiled. "It's beautiful, Emily. Thank you." The little girl beamed, and just like that, something changed. Jack took longer to come around. He still held on to his walls, still kept his distance. But one night, as Sarah sat on the couch reading, Jack walked by and hesitated. She looked up. "Hey, Jack, you okay?" He shrugged, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Yeah, just, He cleared his throat. "Dad's working late again, huh?" Sarah nodded. "Yeah, but he'll be back soon. Want to sit?" Jack hesitated. Then slowly he sat on the opposite end of the couch. For a while neither of them spoke. Then softly Jack muttered, "Thanks for helping Emily with her homework." Sarah glanced at him in surprise. "Of course." Jack shifted uncomfortably, but didn't get up. He just sat there. For the first time it felt natural. Not forced, not awkward, just real. And in that moment, Sarah realized something. She wasn't just a girl who had been bullied. She wasn't just a stepmother by circumstance. She was family, their family. And for the first time in a long, long time, she felt at home. Sarah never thought she had a story worth telling. For most of her life, she had been the quiet girl in the background, the one people overlooked, the one who had suffered in silence. The scars of bullying had left her feeling small, invisible, and unworthy of being heard. But now, as she sat at her desk staring at the blinking cursor on her laptop screen, she realized something profound. She had survived. More than that, she had grown. She wasn't just the bullied girl anymore. She wasn't just the awkward stepmother who stumbled through unfamiliar territory. She was stronger, wiser, and ready to help others who felt as lost as she once did. With a deep breath, she started typing. Sarah had always found comfort in writing. As a child, when the bullying got too overwhelming, she would pour her emotions into a journal, letting the pages absorb the words she was too afraid to say out loud. Now she realized she could use that same love for writing to reach others, people who felt isolated, who didn't know how to navigate the challenges of blended families, who were searching for hope just as she once had. She started a blog called Step by Step: My Journey as a Young Stepmom. Her first post was raw and honest. I never thought I'd become a stepmother at 17. I didn't think I was strong enough. I didn't think I deserved love. For years I was bullied, made to feel worthless, but life had other plans for me. This is my story, one of pain, growth, and the unexpected beauty of family. She hesitated before hitting publish. Would anyone even care? Would people judge her? But then she remembered. This wasn't about being perfect. It was about being real. So she clicked the button, and that single post changed everything. At first, Sarah expected nothing, maybe a few visitors, a couple of comments from strangers, but within days, the post gained traction. People, women, teenagers, even other young stepmothers began reaching out. I thought I was the only one. Your story gave me hope. I've been struggling with my stepkids too. How did you break through? Each message shocked Sarah. People were listening, people cared, and most importantly, people were finding strength through her words. She responded to every comment, every email. She shared more stories of Jack's gradual acceptance, of Emily's sweet gestures, of her own journey from self-doubt to confidence. With every post she wrote, she felt lighter, more empowered. She was no longer a victim of her past. She was a voice for others. One evening, as Sarah sat on the couch, she scrolled through the latest comments on her blog. You've helped me see my stepkids differently. I read this to my teenage daughter. She cried, "Thank you for writing this." Sarah smiled. For so long, she had let pain define her. She had believed the words of her bullies, let their cruelty shape how she saw herself. But now she saw the truth. She was not weak. She was not unworthy. Every hardship, every tear, every lonely night had led her here to a place where she could turn her pain into power. Sarah closed her laptop and looked around the living room. Jack was playing a video game. Emily was drawing on the floor, humming to herself. This was her life now, messy, unexpected, beautiful, and as she sat there, she realized this was just the beginning, a new beginning, one she had created for herself, step by step. Sarah's journey is more than just a story. It is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. From a bullied girl who felt invisible to a young stepmother who embraced an unexpected role, Sarah's life is proof that pain does not define us. How we rise from it does. She could have let the cruelty of others break her. She could have remained trapped in the shadows of self-doubt and fear, but instead she chose transformation. She found strength in the very thing that once made her feel weak. She turned her struggles into stepping stones, creating a new identity beyond the pain of her past. Sarah's story is one of resilience, hope, and the power of love. Love for herself, love for her new family, and love for those who are still fighting their battles. One of the most significant lessons from Sarah's journey is the power of support systems. For years, she suffered in silence, feeling isolated in her pain. Her parents didn't see the depth of her struggle, and the world around her didn't seem to care. But when she found people who believed in her, a kind teacher, her stepchildren who slowly accepted her, and the online community she built, she found strength she never knew she had. This is why no one should suffer alone. Whether it's a mentor, a friend, a support group, or even an online community, finding a place where you are heard and valued can make all the difference. If you or someone you know is experiencing bullying, struggling with self-worth, or facing the challenges of a blended family, reach out. Support is available, and healing is possible. Healing is not a straight path. It is filled with setbacks, doubts, and moments where giving up seems easier. But Sarah's story teaches us that every small step forward matters. She didn't wake up one day free from her pain. She had to work through it, battle her insecurities, and actively choose to believe in herself again and again. Wherever you are in your journey, know this: you are not alone. Your past does not define you, and you are capable of growth beyond your wildest imagination. Sarah found her voice through writing. Maybe yours is through speaking, through art, through mentorship, or simply through standing up for yourself and others. If her story resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this message. Support someone in need. Speak out against bullying. Be the light for someone who feels lost. And if you are on your own journey of healing, keep going. The world needs your story, because just like Sarah, you are stronger than you think.